So, hello, uh, hello, dear speakers, and hello, dear participants, and welcome to our very first 2023 Insight webinar series of the DRBF Region 2, Dispute Avoidance in Innovative Projects. Today, our speakers will be looking at innovative projects like offshore grid, innovation and targeted oil and gas, onshore wind, and energy from waste. And they will explore some issues that may arise in these particularly complex projects and discuss how dispute boards may help all actors taking part in these projects to overcome a plethora of issues born from what we know insofar, but also from uncharted territories yet to arise challenges and contractual arrangements. I am Georgiana Tekuc, a member of DRBF Board of Directors Region 2, representing Europe, and I am your host for today. For those of you new to DRBF, the Dispute Resolution Board Foundation was established in 1996 by the creators of the dispute board process with a mission to develop dispute avoidance and effective resolution for construction projects. Today, the association has almost 1,400 members in over 70 countries as the dispute board process has expanded worldwide and is now used by a variety of projects and long-term contracts of many types and sizes. The DRBF develops best practices and offers training and educational resources for project owners, for contractors and DB practitioners alike, and it partners with other industry organizations to adapt the DB process to new sectors like this one. It may be of interest for you to note that DRBF is publishing a guide to best practices and procedure, the DB manual, and I have one right here, but you could download it from our website. And now let me introduce our speakers. So in the order of speaking today, I'm delighted to introduce to you Nicholas Rigby. Nick is a chartered engineer and a fellow of the Energy Institute and has more than 35 years experience across the energy industry. He has started NRG Management Consultancy to provide contract management and expert witness services to energy companies who find themselves involved in disputes. Nick has experience of dispute resolution across multiple jurisdictions and project types. Prior to starting NRG, Nick was head of contract management at Low Carbon Contracts and dispute director and head of strategy at RWE Energy. I always mispronounce that, sorry. His primary focus is on grid and offshore wind projects, and he is the co-chair of the DRBF Offshore Wind Task Force. He will be joined today by John Halcrow. John has over 40 years experience in the maritime industry, and he worked as chief engineer, marine warranty surveyor, client marine representative, and expert witness. He's an International Marine Contractors Association accredited vessel inspector, an international safety management lead auditor, and is the lead examiner and tutor for the ICS Offshore Support Industry Training Program. Quite impressive. He's a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Shipbrokers, a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, a supporting member of the London Maritime Arbitrators Association, member of the International Institute of Marine Surveyors, and he has trained as an accredited mediator with the Center for Effective Dispute Resolution. And last but not least, our very own DRBF country representatives for the Netherlands, Arend van Wassenaar. As a lawyer, Arend has been working in private practice between 1983 and 2016 in the Amsterdam offices of Puthoff, Northern Rose Fulbright, and Allen & Overy. His practice always focused on complex infrastructure and energy projects, either transactional or in the business of avoiding and resolving disputes. Since 2016, Arend flies under the wings of the Faithful Goose in The Hague. In this capacity, he is frequently appointed as a dispute board member, mediator, and arbitrator, both domestically and abroad. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. And Nick, if you please, take us to the world of innovative projects.
Good. Okay. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Good. All right. Yeah. So welcome, and I'm going to consider the greater challenges that we must overcome in order to reap the greater rewards that come from innovative projects. So first of all, let's look at some of the features of innovative projects. And first of all, we're going to be dealing with new companies and new people who we haven't dealt with before. The outcome of the project is much more uncertain, and there's a lack of established infrastructure. Standards either may not exist, may have errors in them, certainly will be much more harder to get to grips with. So that means that the employer requirements will be quite challenging to prepare, and lessons learned from previous projects will be harder to carry across. The consenting process will be uncertain. Very often, consenting authorities like green projects, but they're also concerned about anything that's unfamiliar to them, and that could slow down and have implications for the process. The risk allocation is particularly challenging. If the risks are not fully understood, or the extent of them not fully understood either, then the allocation between parties will be very challenging. And then finally, the question of integration. Each project will require the makeup of several different elements. Each of those elements has to cope with the issues that we have above in terms of new people, consenting, and all those other issues. So what this leads to is a challenge in finalizing the contracts. The contracts are likely to suffer from ambiguity and late changes. The technical changes in particular will be very difficult to manage because of the uncertainty of them. All of those things then give rise to the possibility of errors, and changes to be changed after the signing of the contract will be challenges. So the need for a dispute avoidance board and the work that party can undertake will have particular benefits compared with conventional projects. Now, I'm picking on a UK government report on one particular technology. The slides are going to be circulated after the event, so you can pick up the link there and go to the actual series of reports that were written on this. But 4 of the 5 issues here apply equally to all innovative projects. The importance of fully assessing the costs and the risk associated with the project before entering into contracts is particularly important. The plant design needs to be robust and one that reduces the probability of things going wrong. Contractor competency is critical in terms of delivery. And finally, scaling up, be it from lab to small scale or small scale to utility scale, needs to be well understood and factored in to the development of the project. Now, finally, in this case, they also had to cope with feedstock quality, and that obviously is something that specifically applies to advanced conversion technology. But the factors that are relevant here mean that there is a high pre-build investment. Finance providers, who will be a smaller group than one would normally have the ability to approach, and those who are interested in participating will have a strong interest in risk reduction. The developers of the project therefore need to anticipate investing significantly in preparing and assessing the project before they start to draw in other parties. And that was one of the things that was found to be particularly lacking in terms of some of these projects on advanced conversion technology. The EPC provider will have to have a good understanding and strong interaction with the technology provider, which is why you sometimes see the technology provider stepping in and taking the role of the EPC provider, although that may not be their normal level area of competence. And secondly, the role of specialist advisors can't be underestimated, as there will be a much greater dependence, and therefore developers are encouraged to work and prepare for the discussions and the questions they will get from specialist advisors. So, as I mentioned, the report that I focused on was relating to advanced conversion technology. This is a technology that has been particularly challenging in the UK. 11 major projects actually claim to have been completed, but only 2 of those are currently operational on general waste. This is a new technology. Generally, EPC contracts are used. Now, I'm going to focus on one particular project for a minute. This one was commissioned in December 2019, and since that time, no generation has been visible, but multiple disputes have been. Almost like a domino effect, in that the employer sued the contractor, and we then ended up with 3 subcontractors also suing the contractor. And the contractor even sued their own directors who were around at the time of signing of the contract. So those are the visible disputes. There were probably more than that. But in order to avoid disputes, it's critical to invest in due diligence. And a dispute board will provide further benefits in terms of recognizing problems early and making sure that appropriate testing is done, for example, in this case, in relation to the treatment of the waste and then this checking the specification of it. But the dispute board will apply their own their key expertise to the actual technology that's involved in this case. Not really to do with the fact that this was an innovative project, but there was also an issue on this in one of these disputes about the fact that an expert witness was appointed who was not appropriate for the case that was being heard. The witness appointed was an expert on energy markets, whereas the issue that was being decided was to do with energy technology and whether energy from waste is an energy project and thereby subject to adjudication, or whether it was a waste disposal project. And the judge was particularly critical of the fact that a inappropriately qualified expert had been appointed. So again, preparation is crucial. Turning now to wind projects, very often these suffer from contractor performance issues. Delays can start to become visible very early on. The employer may have some concerns and recognizes that maybe the contractor is entitled to an extension of time, but doesn't want to give that at the early stage because that creates a precedent. Now, a dispute board will take a different approach. They will ensure that all program changes can be negotiated almost at the time that they begin to appear. And determining a delay does not create a precedence in the same way as an employer granting a delay. And the key cost advantage of a dispute board is that the resolutions can be implemented before the costs start to escalate. So just summarizing on how we can pick up some of these threads and learn in relation to innovative projects. Change post-contract in particular is highly likely. The challenges will not be fully understood at the start. Those are the givens. But a dispute board will facilitate negotiations, discussions between the parties to keep the project on track. And the evidence in particular is that dispute avoidance and adjudication boards can have a particularly positive impact on delayed projects, which of course is one of the crucial problems of innovative projects. They tend to be finished a lot later than was expected. So thank you very much indeed for your attention. I will now stop sharing my screen and I'll allow John to pick up from here.
Wow. A dispute board visiting the site now?
There we are.
Well, thank you, Nick, and good afternoon to the attendees. I'm in the wrong area there. Hold on, I got my. Sorry. Yes, good afternoon. I'm going to introduce and discuss two interlinked initiatives that are intended as catalysts for innovative large-scale decarbonisation projects. And what I aim to do in this presentation is firstly to explain the origins of these initiatives and why innovative projects are likely to result from them. And then to look in some detail at the likely nature of these developments and some of the challenges that will need to be overcome for a successful project. Now, these initiatives are the North Sea Transition Deal and a new offshore wind licensing round that's just been recently rolled out, and it's termed the Innovation and Targeted Oil and Gas Decarbonisation Round, or INTOG. Now, offshore oil and gas production remains strategically important and will remain a crucial element of the UK's energy mix for many years in the future. Current power generation, which is generally facilitated through gas turbine diesel genset operations, accounts for around 35% of Scotland's emissions, about 4% of the UK overall. Consequently, a significant element for achieving reduction for both these governments to meet ultimately their net zero targets. The North Sea Transition Deal was published in March of 2021, and it's a collaboration involving both the UK and Scottish governments and the Oil and Gas Authority, as it was then, now rebranded as the North Sea Transition Authority, and the industry representative body, Oil and Gas UK. I'm not going to discuss the details of the deal, but what I will do is highlight some of the implications that can be derived from it. And that is that energy security will be sustained throughout the transition period. Electrification is considered the most viable option in reaching net zero. That net zero would be a prerequisite for new oil and gas project sanction. Now, I put a question mark there because the deal itself does not formally state that, but that was a perception generally interpreted from the deal, certainly up until recently. Now, there's been obviously things that have been very significant over the last year or so, particularly in the energy security sphere. So whether that determination can still be met, we'll see. However, innovation and development concepts are going to be essential if these decarbonising goals are going to be met. The deal calls for decarbonising production, and it contains a range of emission targets running from now till the ultimate goal of net zero by 2050. And also, critically, it contains a commitment to a collaborative investment in electrification of offshore installations. There are some other elements to do with decarbonising around venting and flaring of gas and monitoring and recording of emissions. But the focus for this presentation is this focus on a collaborative investment for electrification offshore. Electrification offshore is not new. It's been around for many years, and proponents of it would argue for advantages such as reduced supply vessel operations for fueling, reduced weight, space, and O&M requirements for offshore platforms, and from those weight and space savings, the potential for additional equipment to support field development and potentially extend the productive life of the field. So the key element there is that there was a momentum for electrification, even clear of the current focus on its decarbonising aspects. This focus on electrification has resulted in a number of initiatives, but the one I want to focus on is this new offshore wind licensing round. that is specifically targeted at those projects that would provide electricity directly to offshore installation. And this round is the INTOG round. It has two separate application routes. The IN or innovation aspect is for smaller scale projects, under 100 megawatt. And these projects could qualify purely on their innovation alone. That is to say, they don't necessarily have to tick the box in regards to directly supplying an offshore installation. And across the licensing round, options for this category could be considered up to 500 megawatt. A larger one is the TOG round, the targeted oil and gas round. And this is for projects specifically integrated with oil and gas infrastructure, where projects will supply electricity directly to offshore installations. And these would look at larger projects, potentially over 100 megawatt, and overall across the option round, across the licensing round rather, could see options for up to 4 gigawatt. So if we look now at the area where this round applies to on this map, we see the areas that would be considered for development in the blue crosshatch in there, and superimposed on that are the blue dots that are the existing offshore infrastructure. So the key takeaways from this chart are the distance from shore, the distance from making a grid connection, and consequent to that, the water depths that will be experienced in these areas. So we can make some key observations. There is the potential for fast track. No grid connection delay. That is to say that a development that can construct it and provide directly to an offshore installation immediately on setup. And currently with the industry, there's issues, and a delay for a grid connection is significant. For those that will still require that grid connection, within the round, there is the potential for a priority to achieve that, a priority grid connection. As the previous slide showed, the distance to shore, distance from a grid connection will always be an issue. There'll be floating wind projects. Again, we look at the water depth, we see the state of the development industry at the moment. It's a given that that's the technology that would be applied here. And that's going to introduce complexity and change. And I'll discuss that a little bit more about that in a moment. Large established developers could be stepping back and smaller entrepreneurial operators taking the lead. I don't know if that will be the case, but certainly if lessons is learned from innovative projects in the oil and gas offshore construction, then that certainly tended to be the case. However, there's going to be unique issues emerging across a range of categories, challenges from them. And I've categorized these as technical, commercial, and regulatory, just to look in a bit more detail at them. Technical challenges, as I said, floating wind, no large-scale floating wind developments to date. I think the world's largest is off Aberdeenshire, the Kincardine offshore wind farm, 50 megawatt, came online, I think in 21. And consequent supply chain is in early development stages. There's diverse technologies with limited convergence. We just need to look at the range of different floating wind concepts that are being advocated, and then contrast that with how well developed offshore wind is up to now on the fixed foundation concept. We now have a situation where onward modification refinements are taking place much more incrementally. This is a well-developed and well-conversed industry. There'll be new technologies and standards, obviously. Variations after construction start. Nick mentioned that. I'm sure Aaron will probably mention it as well. It tends to go with the territory. These variations after the start of the contract are highly likely. So looking at the commercial challenges, there are tight timelines. I saw one aspiration for 2 of these INTOG awards to be made by sanctioned by 27. Well, we'll see. Competing objectives, commercial viability versus emission targets, obviously. Grid connections, timing, phasing, and associated costs. clearly, if a offshore wind development has its initial customer, an offshore installation, but ultimately the long-term viability of the project is going to rely on a subsequent connection to the grid or potentially a hydrogen production facility, then the timing of that part of the original plan, if that doesn't happen what it's intended, then it'll be serious consequences. And that leads to uncertainty, projects, route to market, etc. No power, excess power solutions, always an issue with wind. The installation offshore needs power whatever the wind is doing. And ideally, the offshore wind generator, they want to be paid for all the power they generate, not just that's utilized by the installation. Platforms supply being a transient demand across the life cycle of an offshore wind farm. That may not be the case for a large new oil and gas field with many years and high production ahead. But for many of the installations where this would be aimed at, it's likely that even with the more optimistic time periods for development, it's likely only to be a percentage of the overall life cycle of the offshore of the wind farm. Integrated revenue, established contracts with the grid tend to be with contracts for difference, whereas the contract for the oil and gas to the offshore installation is more likely to be through power purchase agreements. So potentially some issues there. There'll be consent, regulatory challenges, lead times, license consents, design, construction bottlenecks, all very much driven or accentuated by that tight timelines that the project is calling for. Coordination, again, the nature of these projects means that they will tend to encroach across the jurisdictions of a number of authorities. I've listed a number there that I would say have skin in the game, but there'll probably be more. Potential wind farm and carbon capture overlaps. Now that's a relatively new one on me, but it's a very new one on me. I thought that these two industries could coexist quite readily, but apparently there are issues now causing delays in planning. I think it's associated with the ability to monitor carbon emissions potentially from surface vessels that may be in the vicinity of wind farms. But I include that really as an indication of issues that may not have been initially foreseen that could come into play. Reduced option period, INTOG round requires an initially aimed at 5-year option period, but the consultation period, process, they extended that out to 7, but contrast it with mainstream licensing rounds where 10 years is more norm. There are supply chain development statement requirements. Again, I think the North Sea transition deal looks for 50% of local UK content across the life cycle of energy transition projects out to 2030. So that again can be an issue. I don't know ultimately how successful the INTOG round will be. There are certainly significant challenges for an industry committed to net zero, but the location of its assets, the nature of its operations make emission reduction extremely difficult, very, very hard to abate. And that's emphasized when you consider it as an industry exposed to really intense international competition, as is obviously the case in the oil and gas markets. But what I would say is that if, as a result of INTOG, we do see large-scale floating wind, deep water developments being constructed in very tight timelines, I believe there would be a compelling case for dispute avoidance and adjudicating both. We know what they bring to the table in terms of being when they're embedded in the contract, facilitating early identification of issues, providing a forum for resolving issues prior to them escalating, and providing immediate and continuing engagement. Experts in the field can be appointed to these boards. All of these things are benefits that we recognize from dispute codes. So I hope that by my focus on a specific type of development, that I've been able to highlight some of the issues that innovative projects may engender, and how adopting an effective resolution strategy, dispute resolution strategies, can be beneficial in ensuring the success of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Aaron?
Yes, thank you very much. Oh, but the other participants should stop sharing, I think, and then I can share my presentation, hopefully. And here it is. I trust this is all viewable. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining this this webinar. When I saw the chat box and saw where all the spectators or participants of this webinar are located, it was really quite impressive. So thank you all for staying up so late, if you are from India or Far East. So really very impressive. So some observations from the Netherlands. And I've one question, because in my screen there is a small set of buttons which actually are Zoom related, but are they, Georgiana, are they also on your screen? Where I'm talking about this.
Yes.
How can I remove this? Or it should go out. Yes, here we are. Some observation from the Netherlands. The Netherlands is not a very large economy, but it has some very interesting prospects. We always have had huge volumes of civil works to protect the 60% of our country, which is below the water level, against sea, but also from the rivers Rhine and Meuse, or Meuse, depending on where you're from. So that causes a lot of construction works and challenging projects, especially since the water levels will further rise in the forthcoming decades. So all those works which have been performed in the last 50 years will need to be redone. But also our country is home to some very nice new sustainability projects, and that's where obviously this webinar is focusing on. And like Nick already has stated, the challenges in these projects are that often new, untested and unproven, at least not live, technologies are involved, and conversion projects, biogas projects. It is obviously an industry which has been around for some time, but still it is a highly sensitive type of project with lots of interfaces. Such projects also do have some characteristics where on the one hand there's the contractor, design and build, the EPC contractor, which has to design and build the plant according to the specs of the owner, of the employer, but then the operation will be performed by the owner itself. And so the contractors are asked to provide performance guarantees, which are then again on their turn based on risks and responsibilities to be carried out by the employer, the operator, such as in the need feedstock from biogas or biofuel, the necessary permits, or for instance in geothermal projects where this is highly important, subsoil conditions. The system integration of all those technologies, all these packages, is causing substantial interface issues, both in design and construction. And sometimes these technologies may be existing, but then the size of the projects get bigger and bigger and bigger. Look, for instance, at wind farms or the power generated by turbines, which was 2 or 3 megawatts some years ago, but now we're looking at 40 megawatts. And these still, again, it needs to be tested whether those new technology, those old technologies repackaged in huge projects still work. And one of the projects programs I'm going to be talking about is a clear demonstration of that. So delicate system integration and interface management throughout design, execution, commissioning, which is obviously a very important part, and operation are therefore key. Today, I was having some email correspondence with a colleague of mine in the dispute board for a huge plant based somewhere else, which is encountering some difficulties in getting the final steps, the demonstration run. And he said, well, it's always the case with the huge projects. It's a ride to hell because all these small components don't work. But in the end, as some sort of miracle, it all works. But those interface management issues between all these various phases is also extremely important. And like you can see on this slide, these cause a zillion reasons for possible disputes. And especially this will be the case when different types of contracts are used and different languages are spoken or different, and not only the real language, but the contracts sort of systems do not really match. And sometimes you see, for instance, dispute resolution or avoidance clauses in the main contracts, which are then not back-to-back repeated in the subcontracts or in other contracts, which supply contracts. There's no alignment in all the various processes and the governance structures which apply to these various projects. For instance, change management is often a very difficult sort of issue. Actually, it's in all projects, it's a difficult issue, but especially these sort of projects. The risk management approach may also vary from project to project, and scheduling issues will always be happening. So, and apart from that, many conflicting interests are at stake. These have to do with the investments to be made, which are limited, especially when there's project finance at stake, with limited or no non-recourse finance. And then the EPC contractor will see that because of all these risks happening, the investment is going out of hand. So such projects, as already has been told you by John and by Nick, cry out. It's a compelling case for dispute boards. So actually, I'm repeating the message the two previous speakers have already shared with you. Now let me look at one particular project, which all the information of that can be found on the website of this particular company, which is TenneT. And TenneT is the Dutch and well, still also a large part of Germany, but that will end soon. But because the Dutch government, TenneT is a state-owned transmission system operator. It also operates large parts of Germany, but the Dutch government has decided very shortly ago that TenneT needs to sell that part because it's not in the Dutch interest. However, TenneT, by the Dutch government has initiated 10 years ago a couple of huge programs, actually a portfolio of wind farms throughout the North Sea. I won't show you the map of the North Sea, but it looks a little bit like the map John was just showing to you, but then from the other side of the North Sea. And these wind farms are getting bigger and bigger, larger turbines, but also farther from the shore, and therefore the grid connection, which is, as you can mention, TenneT's responsibility, at least at a certain point, it will be TenneT's responsibility, is a huge issue because the distance can go up to 40 kilometers or 60 kilometers, and therefore the system to be used will be a direct current program. And in the Netherlands, the grid connection offered to the wind farm operators is offered by the Dutch government. So the actually plugging in happens very close to the wind farm in offshore. As you can see on this slide, there will be inter-array cables which are alternating current, and then here on this at sea there will be these huge 2 gigawatt converter stations offshore, and from there on the sea cables direct current will run to the shore. But this is a huge investment program, which as you can see this is taken from TenneT's website. It's a new and innovative offshore standard, has been developed, but it still needs to be proven and tested in close cooperation with various partners all over the world. And it's a one size fits all. It's a new standardized platform, a new certified cable system, a higher transmission capacity, all with as little impact on the environment as possible. It forms the basis for TenneT's next generation offshore grid connection system. The investments involved in this program are running in the billions of euros, 20, 30 billions are figures which are floating around. And at this point in time, as well in the Netherlands as in Germany. There's a small movie which I can try to share with you. Hopefully this works. There we go.
The energy transition is one of the greatest challenges of our time. Wind energy from the North Sea plays a crucial role in tackling this task. Both in the Netherlands and Germany, major efforts are being undertaken to bring more green offshore wind energy to land. As the leading offshore transmission system operator, TenneT sets a new beat for the European energy transition with a new 2 gigawatt standard offshore grid connection. This new standard will double the transmission capacity compared to the existing standard. As a result, fewer connections are required, which reduces the impact on the environment and saves costs and resources. Each 2 gigawatt grid connection system consists of an offshore converter station, a cable system, and an onshore converter station. The connection operates on 525 kilovolt high voltage direct current, allowing highly efficient energy transmission over long distances. In addition, the 2 gigawatt connection system is being prepared to become part of a future offshore DC grid with connections to other countries. TenneT, together with leading HVDC suppliers, has developed a standardized offshore converter station. TenneT believes this standardization will lead to significant cost savings and faster implementation. The offshore converter station consists of a jacket and a topside. Via 66 kilovolt cables, the energy from the offshore wind turbines is transported to the platform. Here, 4 transformers increase the voltage before the electricity enters the converter halls. In these halls, the energy is converted to 525 kilovolt DC to prepare it for its transmission to land. The converter station at sea operates completely autonomously and is normally unmanned. During maintenance campaigns, personnel visit the platform by boat or helicopter. From the offshore converter station, energy is transported to land via a 525 kilovolt XLPE DC cable system. This system consists of 4 cables, a 525 positive and negative pole cable, a dedicated metallic return cable, and a fiber optic cable. The dedicated metallic return ensures that the grid connection system can continue to operate at 50% capacity in the event of a failure in one of the DC cables or a converter, increasing the availability of the connection. After coming ashore, the cables run underground to the onshore converter station. Here, the electricity enters the DC hall where the 525 kilovolt DC is converted back to 380 kilovolt AC. Now the voltage matches that of the onshore grid. These large amounts of green electricity can be delivered to various industries and millions of households.
So, as you can see, a very, very ambitious program, and I'm very happy that TenneT was so kind to post this YouTube movie or film on their own internet page, so getting to grips with what is being envisaged here. And there's some good news. On the 9th of December, we had a very nice regional conference in The Hague, and we're very pleased that Nick Wrigley was one of the speakers there. And one of the other speakers was Carlo Ottaviani, who is the general counsel of TenneT. And during that conference, he announced that all the EPC contracts, both for the platforms and also the supply contracts for the cables, will be based on FIDIC 2017, and each of those will be equipped with the dispute avoidance and adjudication board, which, as you can imagine from what you just have learned, is obviously the right choice. And therefore, he said that as expected, as a result, the risk of the type of disputes will be substantially mitigated by applying the techniques John was just explaining to you. So that's the story from the Netherlands. I hope you like it to some extent. And that concludes the 3 presentations so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arend. Well, let's have a quick look at our Q&A. We have a first question from Doug Lawler. I presume that was going for John at the time. What is a typical life in months of one of these projects? John?
Sorry, I was muted there. If we're looking at the life expectancy of an offshore wind farm, then And there's no reason why these the INTOG round ones would be significantly different from that. It's generally quoted as around 20 years, say 20, 25 year life cycle for offshore wind.
And the next one is more of a comment, I guess, than a question. Michael McGuinness, would you like to come on? Let me see. And how I bring him on? Oops. Okay, thank you. Michael, would you please deliver?
Yes, okay. Now my experience is mostly in oil and gas, but also pharmaceutical semiconductor. But you know, a constant theme in most projects I've been on is that all of the equipment or technologies had to be proven with a minimum of 3 to 5 years of operation experience. But when we're talking about innovative projects, we're talking about projects where we do not have proven operation experience. And we're often talking also about projects where the engineering consultants, the designers, don't have the depth of experience that they have for other projects. And of course, the fact of a lack of experience means that there's a learning curve and there are errors and there are difficulties. And that means that the whole process of engineering must inevitably either take longer so that we verify that what we have is correct. And then when we issue the drawings for construction, we as engineers are confident that the contractors can construct the project with relative ease and without disputes. But if we rush the job, as so many of our clients demand, we must have the fortitude to say, sorry, this job cannot be done in 5 years. It will take 6, 7, or 8, or 10 years. But you cannot rush innovation. Innovation requires us to climb the learning curve. And the learning curve cannot be shortcutted.
I agree with you, but also sometimes under pressure, you would need to hurry up. Remember that what—
I'm sorry, Georgiana, pardon me.
Yes.
As engineers, our obligation is to tell our client, our employer, our owner, give them our best professional. And if, as I did a number of years ago, I was the only man in a room of like over 50 people. And I said, that can't be done in that time. It's going to take you at least 3 to 4 years longer. It's not possible. We have to be able to tell our owners, our clients, our customers that their expectations are not realizable. Now, there are stretch targets and there are impossible targets.
Just a quick second before passing on to Nick first, please, and then to John. What John introduced was a UK government plan. I presume there are a lot of experts working on those documents and putting together some schedules as well. Sometimes when the government is your client, the timelines are perhaps more of an encouragement, and I guess you have to try at least to be within the deadlines. Of course, you'll have lots of obstacles and you'll try to overcome them. But we found that if the, in general, at least, if the timelines are too wide, then, you know, everything slows down. Under pressure, you tend to perform a little bit better. But Nick, if you please, the UK Act, what type of timeline it was talking about, and then Nick first, and then John on the tight timelines, please.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one vehicle that can help to resolve this problem, which is ever present, is the usage of corporate venture capital facilities within most utilities. And most innovative ideas come from smaller companies, and many utilities, large energy companies have their own corporate venture capital businesses. And this is an effective way of the big utility or the large energy company, oil and gas, whatever sector they're in, beginning to get involved with the technology and beginning to understand it. Now, that doesn't avoid all of the problems that Martin set out, but it does facilitate a better level of understanding by the utility or the oil and gas company of the technology that's being developed. And hopefully, as a result, the pre-contract work will be done more effectively, and secondly, the realization of exactly how long it will take to develop the project will be well understood. And John, over to you.
Yeah, no, I would say that the points that Michael made there are very, very relevant. I made a particular point when I finished my presentation of saying I'm not sure how successful this INTOG round will be. There's a lot of challenges, and I think Michael explained particularly one of them. It is extremely tight timelines, but there is a huge commitment appears to be coming down the line. And so we'll see, and that again, I think, just builds that argument, I can see, for dispute boards, because there is such a potential that there could be issues with this. But no, certainly the point you make about innovation being rushed, absolutely relevant. But we will see when there is a drive for this to happen. The round itself may be a disaster. It may well be for so many issues that it's just, we don't see the installations coming through in the timeline, and in effect, carbon reduction is ultimately achieved just by a cessation of production. But what I was attempting to do there is just highlight this is on the cards. The feedback I think they got in this particular case, 19 applications currently being assessed, and the rollout is due at the end of April, so we don't have too long to wait to see how it's looking.
Thank you, John and Nick. So, Mike, we do agree with you, tight timelines, and perhaps tight timelines are going to actually make a lot of tension and a lot of disputes arise from that. Arend, in the project you've presented, and which similar to the one that John presented, a huge project with lots of actors in between. How do you see the dispute board stepping in, especially when you have so many different actors, so many type of different contracts? Well, hopefully the 2017 edition will kick in for everybody, and all actors would apply it. Still, how do you see the dispute board stepping in? Do you think about the bigger panel for the whole project, or do you think contract by contract? And how do you see these interactions taking place? You're on mute.
I'm on mute. I was on mute. Apologies. Thank you very much, Georgiana, for asking that question. And Carlo was so kind to address this already in his presentation in December. And he expected that these, obviously there are great many of these converter stations, but they will be, so there are certain packages, and each package consists of, take 5 or 6 of these platforms per supplier. And then there's also cable contracts. And what they will do is putting one dispute board in place for each of those packages of, for instance, converters. I don't know whether those will be 3 or 5. If they follow FIDICS 2017, will obviously be be 3, but they will. So with one supplier or one contractor, if you call it a contractor, there will, in several projects, there will be one and the same sort of dispute board per, well, package, so per program. And that's how he envisages it. Does that satisfy your question? Now you
I was tempted, seeing that John Papworth is on board. I was tempted to ask him, as an experienced dispute board member, to give his opinion on what he has heard so far. If he's
from sunny Somerset.
yes,
Yes, that's right. Can you hear me then?
yes. Hi, John.
Hi there. Yes, that was a very interesting presentation from all of you. Well, of course, I'm only going to support what you say, aren't I? I think that this is an area where dispute avoidance and adjudication boards must be involved. It shouldn't be an option. It should be one of these components of the project, which shouldn't be argued over. And if you're talking about the lengths of time that you are, then you really need people who get in and know the parties and know the project. I suspect if you're looking for somebody to be around for 25 years, you better get a hold of their birth certificate and make sure that they're going to last the course. In all seriousness, I support absolutely what you're talking about. And thank you for the chance to say something.
Thank you very much, John. A question from Harold McKittrick. How many boards or what number of board members are suitable for an innovative energy project? Who would like to go first? Yes, please.
Well, I'm not going to answer the question directly by giving a number or an approach, but I'm going to use this as an opportunity to plug our next webinar in this series, which is due on the 25th of May. And on that date, we are proposing, that's related to offshore wind projects, and we are actually proposing to have a discussion about the advantages and disadvantages of the different approaches that you can take to dispute boards. So, in some cases, I think the CERN projects, they have got a panel of 7 from whom dispute board members can be selected. You could have a series of each dispute board being completely independent, or there's probably a number of other ways. So please make sure that you reserve the date and prepare yourself for the discussion, because it's certainly one that we can't answer in the time available now.
Thank you. I would like to ask Mr. S533024 to unmute himself and join us, please. You have your hand up. Can you please unmute? You're on the screen. Let me see if I could unmute. Hello? It doesn't. I cannot unmute you. Can you please unmute yourself? Hello?
Apparently the S is for silent.
I don't know. He or she had the hands up, and we brought him. I cannot. I'm trying to unmute, but it's getting me on chat rather than the possibility to unmute him. So, oh, okay. Any other questions, please? Okay, I would like then to ask, in the order that they spoke, perhaps, Nick and John and Aaron to say what they think about how dispute boards could step in and how could this avoidance function be fulfilled, given the short timeline, the huge projects, and the limited number of experts, as John emphasized it, in the field. So how and what should we do, and how the dispute board, how the DRBF could help here as well, please? Nick, your thoughts about it, please.
So I think the first thing is at the point of beginning your involvement, or maybe even before, as a dispute board member, is to determine how much of the preparation has been carried out to the required standard, because the chances are you're going to find that there are gaps. And whilst it might be rather late to start investigating those gaps, at least knowing that the gaps are there and having the opportunity to instigate further testing, in whatever form, is going to be helpful. And then secondly, it's to look at the programs and go through those programs in a lot of detail, challenging whether the periods given for the work included in the program are actually appropriate. And again, chances are you're going to find areas where, when challenged, contractors or subcontractors will say, yeah, well, actually, you know, we are going to have a problem doing that within 12 months. And at that point, you can look at it and say, okay, well, we need to have it in 12 months because that's what you committed to in the program. What are the steps that can be taken to ensure that the product is generally going to be available? So two fields: A, preparation and making sure that has been done, and secondly, the programs and how realistic are they, and what can you do to get them right?
Thank you, Nick. John, please.
I think one of the important elements I would stress is to make sure at the outset of a contract that when a dispute board is included, that it does actually get formed and get underway. Because my understanding is in many cases with the enthusiasm to get underway, it can tend to be an element that doesn't get handled. It's not the priority to ensure that does occur. So I think that's really important, particularly for these type of projects, for the reasons that we've discussed, and certainly when you're on tight timelines and such. And the other thing, which is probably very much connected to what Nick has really said, is just making sure that as a nominate to be on a dispute board, that you do a proper evaluation of your own competence. It is essential that I think Nick explained in his presentation about experts who didn't really have the relevant knowledge, and if you're going to be selected for that, then ensure that you do have that experience. There hasn't been any misinterpretation in what you actually know, because the relevance of these boards is important that the right people fill the posts on them. So that'd be the key things I would say.
I would say so too as well. Aaron?
Georgiana, also given the time, I think I can only echo the comments made by Nick and by John. And what the DRBF can do is, well, again, training, seminars, webinars, reaching out to the large, for instance, reaching out to TenneT in this particular case to see whether it would help them to get some training before they enter into these contracts and to start forming dispute boards, things like that. Yeah.
Perhaps some cooperation where we get some of our experienced dispute board members trained more in depth into the specific of the problems that they encounter, and in the same time, DRBF could offer some training into dispute boards and administration and practice, for instance, is perhaps one of the basics that they should go through. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, John and Aaron. And thank you, John Papworth, for joining us, and Mike for his contribution. We are planning 3 more events in this series for 2023, and you could find full details in the event calendar on the DRBF website. And until the next dedicated event in May, as Nick pointed out, we are inviting you to join us to discuss global claims and how dispute boards are dealing with them in Vienna between 8th and 10th of March, and to our flagship annual international conference in Sao Paulo between 31st of May and 2nd of June. So until next time, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.